Most completed Android apps have more than one screen, and therefore more than one activity. Android Studio makes it very easy to add new activities. I'll show you how to do this in the project New Activity. This version of my project has a single activity, the course detail. It has a single layout file that displays a couple of graphics and some text, and a button that currently doesn't do anything, labeled Register. The matching Java class is named Main Activity, and it's registered in the Android manifest file as the launcher activity, the activity that comes to the screen when the app is first opened. Before I add a second activity, I'm going to rename the existing activity. This existing activity is going to become the second activity, the detail. So to do that, I'll go to the project window, and I'll go to the Java folder under the app, to the main package, and then click to select the activity. Then I'll choose Refactor Rename. You can also press the keyboard shortcut Shift F6. I'll change the name of the activity to Detail Activity, and I'll leave all of the options selected so that that string is searched for and replaced everywhere throughout the project. I'll click the Refactor button and then go take a look at the results. The activity has been renamed, so the class name has changed, and all references to the class have changed as well. If I go back to the manifest file, I see that the launcher activity has changed to match. I'm also going to rename the matching layout file. I'll go to the Resources folder to Layout, click to select ActivityMain.xml, and press Shift F6 to refactor. And I'll rename this Activity_Detail. Then I'll go to the matching Java class, and I'll see that the name of the activity layout file has been updated here. Now, I'll run the app in my virtual device to make sure that everything is still working after all of that refactoring. And the app opens successfully on the device. So now I'm ready to add a new activity. This new activity is going to become the launcher activity. Before I add it, I'll take out the code that's setting the detail activity as the launcher. I'll just remove the intent filter and complete the tag this way. Next, I'll go to the menu and choose File, New. Then I'll choose Activity, and I see a number of activity templates are available. I'll choose the simplest one, the blank activity. The dialog box proposes using the same activity name as before, and I'll accept all that and select the option to turn this into the launcher activity. I'll click Finish, and the new activity and its matching layout are created. Now, I'll go back to the app manifest, and the new main activity class has been added and has been set as the launcher activity. I'll change the label of the new activity to use the app name. And then I'll go back to the detail activity and set its labels to use the course name. And now I'm ready to test again. This time, when the app comes to the screen, it shows the new main activity. That detail activity is no longer reachable. To get to that activity, I'll need to add some additional code to move from one activity to another, but I'll show you how to do that in the next video. In order to move from one screen to another in an Android app, you use something called an intent. Android supports a number of different kinds of intents, but intents in general are simply used to navigate to an activity. When you launch an application on a device, the app framework looks for an intent filter, and this filter is saying that this activity, the main activity, is the launcher activity. You can also create your own explicit intents and use those to navigate from one activity in your app to the next. I'll demonstrate this in the main activity class of this project named Explicit Intent. It has two activities, main activity and detail activity, and matching activity layout files. In the activity main layout file, I'll drag and drop a button and place it in the lower right corner. Then I'll double-click on the button, and I'll set the text of the button to Detail Activity. Then I'll go to Text Mode, and I'll add a click handler. I'll add the attribute onClick. Then I'll type in the name of the event handler method I want to create, btn click handler. Then I'll press Alt or Option and Enter, and select Create the Method. And that creates the method stub in my activity class. In order to navigate to the detail activity, I'll create a variable typed as the Android class intent. It's a member of the package android.content. I'll name the intent detail intent, and I'll initialize it with a constructor method call. There are a number of different versions of this constructor method. I'm going to use the one that starts with a context object, and the context will be the current activity, represented as this. The next argument is the class that I want to navigate to. Use an expression that starts with the name of the activity class you want to navigate to. I'll choose detail activity and then .class. So now this intent describes the target activity. Now I'll start the activity by calling a method of the context called startActivity, and I'll pass in the detail intent. And I'll test that code. When the app appears on the device, it initially displays the main activity, but when I click detail activity, I'm taken to the second activity. There's nothing in the app currently that lets me go back to the original activity, but at the moment I can still click the device's back button, and that should take me back a step. Now, I'd also like to show what's called an up button. It actually points to the left side in the latest version of Android, but it should appear in the action bar next to the activity name. There are a couple of ways of doing this, but the simplest way is just to go to the manifest file and locate the activity registration, and add an attribute named parent activity name and set it to the parent activity. Start with the dot character to represent the package and then the activity class name. And I'll run that version of the app. This time when I click the button, I once again go to the detail activity, but now I see the return icon in the upper left corner on the action bar, and when I click it, I go back to the parent activity. So that's basic navigation, moving from a launcher activity to a secondary activity, and then moving back again by declaring that original activity as the parent. I've previously described how to move from one activity to the next, and how to navigate back by simply declaring a parent activity. But there's a code-based approach to returning to a main activity as well, and I'll describe it here in this project, Finish Activity. Closing an activity is called finishing it, and there's a method named finish that you can use to do this. To show this, I'll go to the manifest file, and I'll remove the parent activity name declaration from the detail activity. Now, when I run the app, and I navigate from the main to the detail activity, I'll no longer see what's known as the up icon, the icon to return to the previous activity. So I'm going to describe a code-based approach to making that icon display. I'll go to the detail activity class, to the onCreate method, and I'll add a little bit of code at the end of the method. First, I need to get a reference to the action bar. There are a couple of methods available named getActionBar and getSupportActionBar. If you're using an app that was based on the templates that are a part of Android Studio, you should always use getSupportActionBar because you're using the support libraries that provide features that were only implemented in later versions of Android so that they'll also work on earlier versions. When you call getSupportActionBar, that returns a reference to the activity's action bar. And then from there, you can call a method named setDisplayHomeAsUpEnabled. The method might not show up at the top of the list for you. If it doesn't, type the beginning of the method name to find it. And then pass in a value of true as the one and only argument. I'll run the app again after making that change. And then once again, I'll go to the detail activity, and now I see the up icon is displayed. But when I click it, nothing happens. When you call setDisplayHome as up enabled, you're only affecting the display, not the functionality. So you need to add a little bit more code to react when the user touches that icon. I'll go back to the Detail Activity class to the OnOptionsItemSelected method. The up icon is considered an option menu item, and so when the user touches that icon, it'll trigger this method call. I'll add an else-if clause to the existing code that's examining the ID of the menu item that was selected. I'll look at the ID variable, which I got by inspecting getItemID, and I'll compare it to this expression, android.r.id.home. The up icon always has this set ID. Then, if that expression is true, I'll call the method finish, and that means close this activity and return to the previous activity. And I'll run the app again. I'll click the button to take me to the detail activity, then I'll click the up icon and I return to the main activity. So now I have two-way navigation that's completely code-based. You can create this navigation this way, or you can set the parent property for the detail activity in the app manifest. Either one works fine, it's just a matter of preference. When you open a secondary activity, you can pass data at the same time. You pass data as something called an intent extra. You can pass extras that are strings, that are numbers, that are booleans, and other simple values. In this project, intent extras, I already have my two activities, and I've also added a third Java class named course. This is a simple data wrapper class that has 4 private fields and 4 matching accessor methods. There's an integer named course number, 2 strings named title and description, and a double value named credits. Before I open the secondary activity, I'm going to pass the title of this course as an intent extra, and then I'll receive it and use it in the target activity. I'll go to the main activity class, and then down to the method that's being called to start the secondary activity. And I'll add a bit of space after I've created the intent object. To get to that data, I'll create an instance of that course class, and I'll instantiate it with the noArguments constructor. Next, I'll pass an extra. To do that, you call a method named putExtra that's a member of the intent class. So I'll call detailintent.putExtra, and notice that I'm asked for 2 values. The first value is always a string. It's the name of the extra, and you'll need to use the same name both when sending and receiving the extra value. The second parameter is the value that you're passing, and this shows the kind of data you can pass: booleans, bytes, characters, character sequences, and so on. And you can either pass simple values or arrays of simple values. To pass a more complex object, it must implement an interface named parcelable, and I won't get into that complexity right now. I'm just going to pass a string. So I'll call putExtra, and I'll assign a string of course title. And then I'll pass course.getTitle. Now, because I have to refer to the name of this extra more than once, I'm going to turn it into a constant. I'll select the string, and then go to the menu and choose Refactor, Extract, Constant. And I'll accept the suggested constant name, course title, and press Enter or Return. Then I'll Control or Command click to see the new constant and verify that it's been marked as public. This will allow me to reference this constant from other places in the app. So now I've passed the data, and now I want to receive it in the detail activity. I'll go to the detail activity, and I'll declare a string that I'll name title. And here's the statement that I'll use to get that data. I'll start with getIntent. That gives me a reference to the intent object that launched this activity. From there, I'll call getStringExtra. At this point, I need to know the data type of the data I'm receiving. And then I need to pass in the name of the extra, and for that I'll use mainActivity.CourseTitle. That's the constant that I just declared. So I've now received that data, and I want to display it in the activity. The activity layout for this activity, activitydetail.xml, has a couple of text views. I'm going to use this one with an ID of TV title, and I'm going to display the value dynamically, replacing the default text, course name. So I'll come back to the detail activity, and now I need to get a reference to that text view object. I'll declare a text view variable that I'll call TV title, and then call findViewById and pass in the ID of the text view, TV title. I'll be sure that the text view class has been imported, and then I'll be able to cast the result as text view. Then I'll call tvtitle.setText, and I'll pass in the title value. So this is how you would handle each individual extra. You would retrieve the value from the intent using the appropriate get method, get string extra, get double extra, and so on. Then you would get a reference to the component that you want to use to display the value, and then you would set the display. And let's test it. Now, when I click the button, I go to the detail activity, but instead of seeing the placeholder text, I see the string that I passed in as a string extra. So this is how we'll build this entire screen. Eventually, we'll be passing in a number of values, one value for each item that we want to display, and it'll be up to the code in the detail activity to retrieve the values and display them using visual components that are a part of the activity layout. I've previously described how to send data from one activity to another. You can also return data when you finish the second one, so you can send back what's known as a result. I'm working in the project Return Data, which already has code to open a second activity. When the user touches a button, I create an intent, I put a string extra into the intent for the course title, and then start the activity. In the detail activity, I receive that value in the onCreate method, and right now, I'm just displaying that value. In the detail activity, I'm going to return the string again, but concatenated with another string. To do that, I'll need to save the string when I receive it. So I'll go to the top of the detail activity, and I'll create a local field. I'll say protected, string, and I'll call this course title. Then I'll come down here to the onCreate method, and instead of creating a new title string here, I'll use that field. I'll set the variable's value there, and then display it using the text view control. So far, all I've done is save the data, but now I'm going to change some of this code so I'm returning a string from this activity when I finish the activity. I'll go to the XML layout file for this activity, and I need to make sure before I follow the next step that I've properly bound the layout file to the activity class. That's done in the context attribute, which right now is set to main activity. I'll reset it to point to the correct Java class, detail activity. Then I'll come down here to the button, and I've already added an onClick attribute set to a string of register click handler, and I'll press Alt or Option and enter a return, and create the method in the detail activity. Next, I need to add data to an intent. Just like I did before when I sent data from the first activity to the second, I need to place the data in the intent to send it back again. I'm just going to use the same intent object. I'll call getIntent, and then putExtra, and I'll use a string of resultMessage. And then I'll pass back a literal string of you're registered for, and I'll append the course title, which I saved when the activity was created. Next, I need to indicate a result code telling the original activity what the status of this request was, and also tell it where to get the data. You can do that with the method setResult. I'll use the second version of this method that wants an integer and an intent object. I'll pass in a constant result_OK, which is always available in activities, and then I'll once again pass back the intent object by calling the method getIntent. And finally, I'll call the finish method. And that means I'm done with this activity, return to the calling activity. So I'm done in the detail activity, and now I need to add code in the main activity to receive the result. In the event handler method, where I'm launching the second activity in the first place, I'll change the method I'm calling from start activity to start activity for result. This method requires two values, the intent object and something called a request code. The request code is a numeric value. It can be pretty much anything, but if you're dealing with multiple activities, you should create one request code for each activity you might request. And because we'll need to refer to this multiple times, I'll turn it into a constant. I'll select it and choose Refactor. This time I'll go through a slightly different path and choose Refactor this, and then choose Extract Constant, and I'll accept the suggested name request code. If you wanted to be specific, you could refactor this and instead call it detail request code. So now I'm requesting the activity and saying I'm expecting a result. When I come back to this activity, that'll trigger a method called onActivityResult. This is an override, so you can start typing the name of the method and then select it, and Android Studio will fill in the method stub. You don't need to call the superclasses method here, so we can delete that. And now I'll add the following code. Notice I'm receiving three parameters. The request code, which is the same value I set when I started the second activity, the result code, which was set in the other activity, and the intent object that contains the data. I'll evaluate both the request and the result code. I'll use an if statement. And the first expression I'll look at is if request code equals detail request code, and that's the constant that I created, and then I'll add a nested if statement, and this Boolean expression will be result code equals result underscore OK. So if both of those expressions are true, then I know I'm getting back a result from the activity I requested, and I know that everything was okay as judged by the code in that activity. And I can do something with the string. First, I'll retrieve it from the intent. I'll use string. I'll name this MSG for message, and I'll call data.getStringExtra. I'll pass in a name of result message, and that should return the correct string. If you want to make your code more robust, extract result message as a constant and refer to the constant in both places. But then I'll use a toast message. I'll call toast.makeText, and I'll pass in this as the context, the message I just retrieved, and the amount of time I want the toast message to appear, which I'll set using the constant length long. And then I'll show the message. The nice thing about a toast message is you don't need to worry about formatting or placement. All of that is handled by the framework. So now I'll once again run the app. I'll click the Detail Activity button. That takes me to the course details. Then I'll click the Register button, and I see the register message returned. So I've successfully sent data from the main activity to the detail activity, and I've sent data back as a result. So far, I've used explicit intents to open specific activities within the same app, but you can also open other activities from other apps using implicit intents. With an implicit intent, you define the kind of data that you want to share with the other activity. You don't know which apps might be out there, but you simply offer the data, and then it's up to the apps to accept and use the data. If more than one app has registered for a particular kind of data using an intent filter, then the user will see a list of available apps that can handle the request. But if there's only one such app, then it'll just launch the activity. I'll show how to send data to another app using the implicit intent project. In the main activity class for this project, in the layout file for the class, I've just added one more button that I've labeled Website. And I've given it an ID of BTN Website. That's at line 30 of this file. Now I'm going to add a click handler method. I'll set an onClick event handler, and I'll name this website click handler. And then I'll generate the event handler stub. The first step is to create the data that you want to share. In this example, I'm going to use a URI, pointing to a web page's URL. I'll go to Chrome, and I'm going to navigate to the ruacademy.com website. This is the website for the fictional organization for which I'm creating this app. And I'll just copy the URL to my clipboard. Then I'll go back to my code. Next, I'll create an instance of the URI class. Be sure to use the version of the URI class from Android.net, not from Java.net. And I'll name it webpage. I'll get its value by calling a method named URI.parse, and I'll pass in that URL wrapped in quotes. Next, I'll create an intent. I'll call this web intent, and I'll create it with a version of the intent constructor method that takes two arguments, an action and a URI. Android defines a set of actions as constants that are members of the intent class. So if you wanted to make a phone call, you might use action call. Or if you wanted to trigger the camera button, it might be action camera button. I'm going to use action view. That means I'm asking for an app that can view a particular kind of data. And then I'll pass in my web page URI. Now, the important thing here is that the intent filter that's registered with each app can identify a string in the URI and watch for it. So the active string here that it will identify this to a web browser is the HTTP prefix. When I make this request, apps that have registered to listen for that prefix will be able to offer to help. And if there's only one app that's registered, that's the one that'll open. So now I'll do the same thing as I did before with an explicit intent, calling start activity, and I'll pass in the web intent object. And that's all you have to do. The Android framework will handle everything else. I'll run the app and then click the website button, and that takes me to my browser and I see the website appear. When I click the back button on the device, I go back to the original activity. So this is an implicit intent. Again, I'm saying here's the data, can somebody handle it? And because I only have one app on this device that can handle a website URL, that's the app that opens.